everybody. It's Jerri Ward back for another show of I Object, Justice Examined. And I have a wonderful guest here who I'm honored to be able to interview and whose writings I have followed for several years now. And I think that he is one of the best writers and one of the best commentators that we have around, and he's also now a candidate for the presidency. He is the nominee of the Constitution Party for this year. It's Chuck Baldwin. He's also the founder, pastor of Crossroads Baptist Church in Pensacola, Florida, and he is the host of a lively, hard-hitting syndicated radio talk show on the Genesis Communications Network called Chuck Baldwin Live. He also was the vice presidential candidate for the Constitution Party in 2004, and I'm very pleased to welcome Pastor Chuck Baldwin to the show. Thank you for being with me, Pastor Baldwin.
Jerry Lynn, it's great to be with you. Thank you for letting me come on your program.
Well, let me ask you, do you prefer to be addressed by Pastor or Dr. Baldwin?
Just call me Chuck. How about that?
Okay, I'll call you Chuck. It'll probably be the first and only time I've ever been able to call a presidential nominee by his first name. So,
well, please call me Chuck. Thank you.
Well, why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself? What have you been doing the last few years? You're a pastor of a church, and what got you interested in politics?
Well, I guess I had my first taste back in the 1980s when Dr. Jerri Falwell, who was a personal friend of mine, I was in his first graduation class there at what is now known as Liberty University back in 1975. And the school was very small then. And Jerry and I became real close friends. And he asked me if I would serve as the executive director of the Florida Moral Majority. And I agreed to do so. And I traveled with Jerry, and we went all over the state of Florida registering voters, and over, I guess, 50,000, 60,000 brand new voters we registered back in those days. I traveled with him extensively. So that would have been my baptism into the, if you want to say, the political process. But I think really it was the election of Bill Clinton in 1992 that really awakened me to the fact that, yes, I'm a pastor, and I'm a good citizen. I vote, and I take my citizenship responsibly, et cetera. But at the same time, it dawned on me, that as a citizen, I have a duty to my country just as much as any other American. And just because I'm an ordained minister doesn't mean I gave up my citizenship. And so I figured, the country really is in turmoil right now. And I thought about it, I prayed about it, I deliberated for 2 years, and that's when I started my radio talk show in 1994. Was part of that great revolution. We were very instrumental in helping to elect Joe Scarborough from our district. Now he's MSNBC commentator,
right,
to Congress. And from there, the syndicated columns came later. And but I think that was the thing that awakened me to the fact that no matter who we are, whether we're Christians or non-Christians, whether we're in the professional world or the blue-collar world, doesn't matter where we are, we're all citizens of this country. We all have a responsibility, yes, to our families and to our duties, but also to be the citizens that we ought to be for the survival of our country. So, in a real brief nutshell, that's kind of how I came to be what I'm doing.
Well, you mentioned the moral majority with Jerri Falwell, and one thing about that movement, it was really for this, at least for that century, for the 1900s, that was pretty groundbreaking because Christians had not been involved in politics, and he was one of the leaders of getting Christians actively involved in government instead of them just holding back and saying that they're of this world but not in this world. And was that one of your motivating factors? Is the fact that Christians should be involved in the political process so that we can impact it?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Edmund Burke said, all that's necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And, we're all citizens of our country, regardless of our our personal faith or lack thereof. And, I think during all that, too, it really gave me a desire to study my history. When I say my history, I mean our history as a country, and constitutional government. So I really dug into that very deeply. And I studied our history. I studied the writings of the Founding Fathers and the Federalist Papers. I studied Constitution and all of the, everything I could get my hands on. I just devoured it. And I came away with a real education as to how far removed our nation has taken itself from those founding principles. And I really believe that we are now teetering on the edge of the loss of constitutional government, individual liberty, and our national independence. I think we're just holding on by a thread. And when I was approached by the Constitution Party, I supported Ron Paul in the primaries extensively. And if he had won the nomination, I doubt very seriously that I would be doing what I'm doing today. But he did not. And the Constitution Party came to me, actually, and asked me if I would put my name in nomination. And, again, I had to really think about that, but I eventually did. And to my surprise, they nominated me by an overwhelming majority of the delegates at their national convention in April in Kansas City. In Kansas City. And so here I am, and I really think that when you look at the two major party candidates today, whether it's Barack Obama or John McCain, you're looking at two peas in the same pod. There's really no difference in terms of the overall agenda. And my study of history and my study of the Constitution leads me to believe that if we do not return very quickly to our founding principles, our country as we know it will not long exist.
Well, I was very pleased when I started reading your columns about Ron Paul, because I also am a Ron Paul supporter and worked hard to try to get him the nomination at the grassroots level. So I was very pleased about that. And also, one thing that I want everyone out there to know is the documents that you studied that you just mentioned. Haven't you gathered those together and in a volume so that people may read those same documents?
Yes, thank you. We call it the Freedom Documents. That was interesting how that came about. I was in my quest to devour all of these documents. I just knew there had to be a book, one title, one volume that had the majority of these great documents in one place. And I looked and looked, and I found 2 or 3 here, 2 or 3 there. I thought, I can't believe this. And I, to my chagrin, I could not find a volume where all of these documents were included under one title. So we set out to do that, and it took us over a year, about a year and a half actually, to compile them and to get them all typed and edited and so forth. And we put them together. We call it the Freedom Documents, and it's the only place anywhere in America that I know you can get these. And I know because I've looked. And that is, available only through my radio show. And people can go to my website, chuckbaldwinlive.com, and they can order those. But that was a result of my study and my research, and not being able to find them. There's nothing unique about it. It's the same documents that you can read, in different places. The only thing unique about it is the fact that we've compiled them in one volume under one title.
And, again, that can be found at chuckbaldwinlive.com.
chuckbaldwinlive.com, that's right.
And I would recommend everybody go and order those documents because I think they're crucial to everyone's education, and I think they're especially useful for homeschoolers. Very much so. They're very popular among homeschoolers, and they're popular among school teachers of all kinds, public and private. The Supreme Court of the state of Tennessee a year or so ago ordered several copies for their staff there at the Supreme Court in Tennessee. We've had judges, that have ordered them. We've had parents, homeschoolers, teachers of every sort, military personnel. I had a retired Marine Corps colonel that ordered a couple copies here just a few months ago. And again, we're trying to get the American people to become reacquainted with their history.
And I've had so many people say, they start reading those documents, and there's very little commentary. There's just a little synopsis in the front of each one, a little background information, and then it's just word for word the document itself. And as people read those documents, I've had so many testimonies come back to me and say, Chuck, as I read these documents, I just get fired up. I just want to stand up and salute the flag, and I want to get out and do something for my country, and I realize how great it is, and there's nothing like reading the true history of America to really give you an appreciation for who we are, what we are as a country, as a people. And then it also, I think, serves to awaken us as to how far gone we have been here in this last several decades, and how important it is that we really stand up now to reclaim, what we are as a people.
Well, let's talk about that awakening, because we already talked about the fact that Christians awoke during the 1980s and decided that they needed to start taking back over society and politics and things of that nature. And as you know, most of those Christian conservatives gravitated to the Republican Party. And here you're running for a third party, the Constitution Party. Why don't you tell the folks all the ways that you believe that the Republican Party has let down social and Christian conservatives, and is there even a conservative movement left?
Yeah. In the Republican Party, I would say there's not a conservative movement left. I don't even think that most of the Republicans today really understood what that word conservative really means. I'll maybe get back to that in a minute. But, I think if you look, Ronald Reagan came to office at least proclaiming a conservative message. Now, I think there's a lot of room to argue that, especially in his second term, he abandoned some of the commitment to those conservative principles. But nevertheless, his rhetoric, his message to the American people was a conservative message. And that's been the last Republican nominee that has proclaimed what you would call a traditional conservative message. George Herbert Walker Bush did not. George Bush II has not. These fellows have taken the Republican Party as far away from true conservatism as you can possibly imagine.
Well, wait a minute. G.W. Bush came in proclaiming that he was a conservative and, in fact, a conservative born-again Christian.
Yeah, that's right. He did come into power professing that, but as soon as he took office, his policies were in diametric the opposite of what he proclaimed. When you look at almost any issue, you'll find that there's very little difference between what George W. Bush has done and what any Democrat would do if they were in the White House. So by 2004, I had enough. I said, that's it. This party has left me. The principles that I believed can no longer. They're no longer welcome in the Republican Party. I have no home in this party anymore. And so I began to look around. Is there a political party out there among the independents that I could call home? Is there a party that has the values and principles that I have? And I found the Constitution Party. I read the platform very carefully. I talked with people that were leaders among the party, and I realized, yes, here is a party where the Constitution of the United States is honored and revered, where the fundamental principles of our nation are still the driving force of this party, and that's the party I wanted to be a part of. So I became part of this party in 2004.
Well, I want to explore that in many ways, but one thing I want to get back to the Republican Party, because now I believe that they are attempting to scare us into voting for McCain based on a claim that that Obama will win if we don't, mm-hmm. and that Obama will appoint justices to the Supreme Court who would be a disaster. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah. They do this every 4 years, though, Jerri. I mean, every 4 years. Last time it was John Kerry. He was the monster. He was the boogeyman. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter who it is. They trot out this straw man, this boogeyman scenario, and the world's going to come to an end if the Democrats elected. And they try to scare, and they do. They do scare conservatives and Christians many times into voting for, quote-unquote, the lesser of two evils. I'm reminded of a scripture that says that God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. And I think sometimes we've lost our sound-mindedness, and any time we give way to fear, we always lose our sound-mindedness. And on the judges, for example, I mean, is that the only issue? And that's about it. You know, I hear these Republicans talking about how that we got to elect John McCain, and about the only thing they have left is the judges, because they know that John McCain has no fidelity to virtually any other of the conservative principles that conservatives historically have believed in. So they resort back to this, well, you know, at least he's going to give us good judges. And that's a joke. Let me give you some examples. Remember, it was John McCain who voted for Stephen Breyer on the Supreme Court. It was John McCain who voted for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, ACLU lawyer Ruth Bader Ginsburg. John McCain voted for her. It was John McCain who was one of the Gang of 14 who got up in front of the American people and said, we promise to oppose pro-life conservative justices to the court. Now, conservatives have forgotten all of that. Now, for the sake of winning an election for the Republican Party, they're willing to swallow this fantasy that John McCain is going to appoint all these wonderful judges. Let's go back to 1973 with that infamous Roe versus Wade decision. January 22nd of that year, the court ruled basically that abortion on demand would be legal in this country. And ever since then, 40 million unborn babies have been killed in their mother's wombs, all right? As the court was constituted in 1973, there were 7 justices who had been appointed by Republican presidents, and there were only 2 justices that were appointed by Democrat presidents. You look at it today, and that is still that same ratio. It's still a 7-2 Republican appointed court over Democrat appointed court. The Republicans have controlled the Supreme Court for the last 30-plus years. Every time I hear Republicans complaining about the court, complaining about the judges, they need to go look themselves in the mirror, because they are the ones that have controlled the Supreme Court for the last 3 decades.
And we still have Roe versus Wade on the table.
We still have Roe versus Wade. And not only that, the Republicans controlled the entire federal government for 6 years, from 2000 to 2006. The White House, the House, and the Senate. They had it all. And what did they do? They didn't do anything about Roe v. Wade. They did nothing about abortion on demand. They look at what they did to spending. You got to go back to Lyndon Johnson to find the spending, the out-of-control spending that took place under George Bush and the Republicans in Congress.
Exactly.
Ron Paul, every year, would introduce, Jerri Lynn, his Sanctity of Life Act. Every year, it would sit there and gather dust and die. Wouldn't even make it to committee, much less out of committee. And that is the bill
that would strip jurisdiction of the abortion issue from the federal judiciary.
That's exactly right. It would do 2 things. It would, number one, it would identify every unborn child as being a person under the law from the moment of conception. Number 2, it would remove abortion from the jurisdiction of the court under Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution, which is the right of the Congress to do. If the Republicans were truly pro-life, as they proclaimed to be for all those years from 2000 to 2006, if Bush was truly pro-life, they would have passed Ron Paul's Sanctity of Life Act, and Roe v. Wade would be overturned, and abortion on demand would be illegal today, but they did nothing.
Well, I think it's crazy to trust judges and lawyers to overturn something like that anyway, and that's one thing I want to talk a little bit about when we come back, because even with the appointment of the 2 new justices, we came out with not that great opinion in the partial birth abortion case, which you wrote about, and I want to discuss when we come back. We're coming up on a hard break, so everybody please stay over as I interview my guest, Dr. Chuck Baldwin, who is a candidate for presidency of the Constitution Party. Stay tuned. Jerri Ward back with my guest, Pastor Chuck Baldwin, who is the Constitution Party candidate for the presidency. And when we left for the break, we were discussing Supreme Court appointees. And one thing that people laud Bush's presidency for is the 2 Supreme Court justices that he got on that he was able to get on the Supreme Court. But on the abortion issue, what I was discussing with Chuck is that you really can't trust lawyers and judges on this issue. And in fact, we recently had a case that everyone thought was favorable come out about the partial birth abortion ban. And Chuck, you wrote an article about this because you saw some real problems in that case. Would you like to expound upon that a little bit?
Yeah, everybody, as you said, lauded the ruling here as being a great victory. Of course, nothing has happened. It was immediately challenged, and so nothing has actually taken place to thwart partial birth abortion at this point. It's moot. But the decision itself was really nothing to brag about. And I quoted some of the press reports of those who had studied the issue and had read the issue, and then I read the issue myself. The opinion that was written by Justice Anthony Kennedy, who of course himself is a faithful defender of abortion rights. But for example, the Mobile Press Register said, and I quote, "The court has done no such thing," meaning overturning Roe v. Wade or stopping abortion. And in the majority opinion, justices pointed out that the ban does not violate a woman's right to terminate her pregnancy, close quote. And that's exactly right, because Justice Kennedy, when he wrote for the majority, he said, quote, "The act allows, among other means, a commonly used and generally accepted method, so it does not construct a substantial obstacle to the abortion right," close quote. And what they really did here that I thought was so abysmal in this ruling that it seems like most of my pro-life brethren just missed, by the fact that it took one small, and in the overall number of abortions, a very small percentage, maybe less than 1% of all the abortions may have something to do with what is called a partial birth abortion, a very limited procedure, and by spotlighting that one or highlighting that one procedure, it basically what it did was it gave justification and legitimacy to the other 99% of the abortions that take place by saying that, well, we're not interfering with a woman's right to kill her baby if they do it this way, or this way. So it really gave justification and legitimacy to 99% of all of the abortions that take place for the sake of this 1%. And as, of course, now the courts have just turned right around and manipulated it again, and so nothing has changed. The law itself has not even gone into effect. So the point is that the bill as was passed absolutely did nothing to stop any kind of abortion, and not one unborn baby's life has been saved through over 6 years of a total Republican domination of the federal government. Not one unborn child's life was saved.
So much for voting for John McCain because he'll get better judges, maybe. In fact, you've written quite prolifically on the idea of voting for the lesser evil. Mm-hmm. And you wrote about that when you were supporting Ron Paul, and you've written about that lately. What do you counsel Christians when they say, well, voting for McCain, he's the lesser of the evils?
Well, I can just hear Christians in the first century sitting around and talking among themselves, and one of them saying, well, I think I'm going to vote for Nero because he's not as bad as Caligula. Where in the world do we find this among, the sacred text, the things that we hold dear? I mean, this is what amazes me about Christians today. In an attempt to be politically powerful, and I hate to say it, maybe, Jerri Lynn, but I wonder if not, it's a desire to sit at the king's table. It's a desire to be accepted among the power elite, and we want to be on the inside of things. And in an attempt to do that, we're willing to sacrifice the principles that we have taught and preached for so long. You know, think about the story of Daniel. Think about the story of the 3 Hebrew children. Think about the story of Simon Peter, who said we ought to obey God rather than men. Think about all of the great examples of biblical history. Think about our own American history. Think about our founders there on Bunker Hill. Think about Thomas Jefferson when he wrote, and the others that signed the Declaration of Independence. Think about those brave men that fought in the Alamo down there in Texas where you are. Think about the history of our country, and we laud and we honor and we revere the great examples of courage and bravery of men who put principle and truth and honor above political correctness and above this go-along to get along mindset and beyond this lesser of two evils idea. And then we turn right around after having taught that, preached that, believed that. We turn right around and we say, well, when it comes to voting, when it comes to politics, we've got to accept the lesser of two evils. How in the world have we come to the point that we're willing to sacrifice all these things that we believe are so sacred just because they happen to relate to politics? I don't get it, quite honestly.
Well, we need to remember that if we're going to sit at the king's table, we need to sit at the real king's table.
Yeah, there you go.
So, well, I would like for you to tell everybody what you would do as president and why we should vote for you.
Well, if you really believe that our country is in serious trouble and that the two major parties are both culpable, you have to look for an alternative. If you really believe that John McCain and Barack Obama are not going to reverse course, you have to look for an alternative. And I think when you start looking for an alternative, you'll find that the Constitution Party and my candidacy is that alternative. For example, I make no bones about it. 30 days after I'm sworn in as president, we will secure our ports and borders. It is unconscionable that we would fight a war against terror halfway around the world in Iraq and Afghanistan and then not secure our own country's borders. We've taken National Guard troops from America to guard the borders of Iraq. And while at the same time, our own borders are wide open. I just came from the border. I was just there in California. I saw the major border crossing there coming from Mexico just south of San Diego. And then I went out to the wide open border in the deserts of California, and I saw the situation there. And I see what our Border Patrol is up against. I see what our customs people are up against. They're outmanned, they're outstaffed, they're outgunned. They don't have the equipment, they don't have the personnel. It's sad. I found out when I was on the border that our Border Patrol people don't even have night vision equipment. They don't have GPS equipment. Can you imagine such a thing? A few Border Patrol agents here and there that are trying to stop this invasion that's coming across. We're talking about human traffickers. We're talking about drug dealers. We're talking about gang members, MS-13, and other gangs. We're talking about violent people that are literally invading our country every day, 24 hours a day, and our government is doing nothing, virtually nothing, to stop it. As president, I will secure the border. John McCain's not going to do it. He wants to give amnesty to illegal aliens. Barack Obama's not going to do it. He agrees with McCain. Neither one of these men has any intention of securing our country's borders. So if you really believe that's important in 2008, you really believe that this is an invasion and that we've got to secure our borders, you only have one choice this year, and that's Chuck Baldwin for president.
Yeah, you have to wonder how serious they are about keeping us safe when they won't even do that very basic thing. Well, what else would you do? What else would you do as president?
For example, I just left the state of Michigan. I used to work up in Detroit at the General Motors plant there, Plant 5, truck and coach, and that was from 1971 to 73. Jerri, when I was there, we were working around the clock, 3 shifts, 8 hours a day. The economy was robust. People were at work. There was hardly no unemployment. Economy was great. I go back there 35 years later. The plant I used to work at has been torn down. Most of the other plants that I knew have been torn down. The ones that aren't, they're dilapidated, run down, abandoned. There are parts of Detroit that look like a war zone. I'm not kidding. There are parts of Detroit that look like third world countries. It's sad beyond words. The economy in Michigan is absolutely in the tank, and this is a direct result of both major parties and the economic principles that they've applied in this country over the last couple of decades. Not the least of which was NAFTA. Bill Clinton and Bob Dole conspired together to pass NAFTA in the dark of night with Congress out of session, a parliamentary maneuver. Since then, there's been the WTO and GATT, and now CAFTA and FTAA is in the works, and John McCain is down there in Colombia trying to work out the Colombia free trade deal. Barack Obama says, well, we might consider revamping NAFTA. Revamping it, John McCain wants to expand it. Barack Obama wants to revamp it, whatever that means. He's given us no details. I'm saying we need to eliminate it. We need to get out of NAFTA. We need to get out of CAFTA. The FTAA is DOA when I become president. We cannot allow these so-called free trade deals to continue to destroy our manufacturing. Our jobs are going to Mexico, to China, to India. Our manufacturing and our plants are closing down. Our people are out of work. And it's a direct result of these free trade deals that have been foisted upon the American people by both major parties. So again, if that's an important issue to you, then you've only got one candidate, because neither McCain nor Barack Obama are going to change anything in that regard.
Well, also talking about the economy, for the past probably 50 years, we've also pursued a course of inflation. Everything about our economy, it's totally unbiblical, and God has warned us time and time again about it, but everything is about debt and inflation.
Right. Well, the only difference between the Democrats and Republicans in this regard is the Democrats want to tax and spend, and the Republicans want to borrow and spend. That's the only difference. Neither of them has any desire to stop spending or to curtail out-of-control spending. They're not going to do it. I think it's very important. My platform is I want to get rid of the IRS. I want to dismantle the 16th Amendment. I want to dismantle the Federal Reserve. I want to get the personal income tax off the backs of the American people. It's unconstitutional in my view, and I think that this inflation situation and the oil prices that we're dealing with today, there's several reasons for that, but not the least of which is the way that our feds are just creating money out of thin air. And the more they devalue the dollar by printing currency out of nothing, the more it drives up the prices of commodities. That's one of the reasons that we're in trouble with our oil prices.
Exactly, and of course, without being able to buy oil, we can't really make economic advances. Well, Pastor Baldwin, I want to thank you for being with me. I want to wish you luck in your campaign, and I will be voting for you.
Well, thank you. That's a great endorsement. I appreciate that very much. Thank you for letting me come on your show.
Well, thank you, and everybody, let's stay over for some more I Object, Justice Examined. Hello, everybody. It's Jerri Ward back for the next to the last segment of I Object, Justice Examined, and I hope that all of you enjoyed the interview that I had with Pastor Baldwin. That was a pre-recorded interview, and I know I sure learned a lot from him about what his campaign stands for, and I was quite proud and honored to be able to bring him to you today. I have been reading him for quite a while, and all of you can read his information at chuckbaldwinlive.com. I also have his campaign website hyperlinked on his name on the Right Talk webpage, but he is a great candidate. He is a great man, and there are many topics that I wanted to get into with him that I was unable to get into because, of course, since he is a presidential candidate, he definitely has limited time now and cannot give extremely long interviews to anyone. But one thing that I did want to talk to him about was he is a pastor of a church, of Crossroads Baptist Church, and one thing that he has started that I think is very interesting is the Black Regiment of preachers. And if you go to his website, you can read the history on the Black Regiment, because during that period of time, our preachers, before they gave in to the government and started taking the tax breaks and the not-for-profit exemptions, which, of course, placed certain government restrictions on them about what could happen in the churches, we had very independent preachers. And at the beginning of the American War of Independence, there was a Black Regiment of preachers. And, of course, the Black Regiment stands for the fact that they wore black robes back then, or black suits. And they were very independent. They didn't bow to King George, but rather they talked to their parishioners about freedom and liberty. And they were instrumental to the War of Independence, our War of Independence from Great Britain, and they were a very instrumental part of our revolution. And now that I'm back on, I just heard word from my producer that Alana Mercer has joined us, and Alana is a guest on my twice-weekly show, a regular guest. And Alana,
hi,
are
Jerri.
You there?
Hi, Jerri. I am.
Great. Thanks for being back on the show. And I want to let everybody know a little bit about you in case they haven't listened to the show before. Alana is a U.S.-based classical liberal writer, and that does not mean leftist. She writes a popular weekly column, Return to Reason, that is published at worldnetdaily.com. She also is the author of a book, Broadside, One Woman's Clash with a Corrupt Culture. And Alana also has a blog called Barely a Blog, and you can find that, a link to that at her website, alanamercer.com. And one thing that I wanted to talk to Alana about is, Alana, you've been writing a lot about the Second Amendment the last few days.
Well, related topics. I don't write much about the Second Amendment because there's such fabulous people doing that, and there's no need for overlap. So, yes, I thought that just in time for Independence Day, we had marvelous news about the gentleman in your neck of the woods, Joe Horn.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and we might see, hard cases like that turn into good law rather than bad law.
In case people don't know about Joe Horn is the neighbor of a family whose house was broken into by two illegals. And Joe Horn, despite the dispatcher from the police department telling him to hide in his house, went out and confronted them to save his neighbor's property, and ended up shooting and killing both of them.
He did, and I was extremely curious to see to hear what you would have to say about that, because really, as the adage goes, hard cases don't make bad law, and this certainly was a hard case. As many detractors of this hero put it, he did shoot them outside, as they were making escaping, so to speak.
Right. Well, one of them, I think he shot in the back, and the thing is that he was no billed by a grand jury. A grand jury refused to indict him, and if this had been the 1800s and this would happen, nobody would have raised an eyebrow about it, because they were two thieves. They were getting away with property, and as everyone knew back then, property it can be your means of survival, and it's yours. And if somebody's going to come steal it, they risk their lives. And in the 1800s and early 1900s, nobody would have batted an eye. But we've had all this case law, and we've had the legislature come up with statute after statute where they've attempted to place limitations on the rights of property owners to protect their property
and that of their neighbors
with lethal force. And so I was a bit afraid of what a grand jury might do, but I quite frankly, I was pleased that they no-billed him.
Oh, absolutely. But in any other state, this would not have happened. And the only thing that we can say is possibly with Hella will come, relitigation of castle laws and maybe better law.
Well, I think state after state is strengthening, at least in the South, is strengthening the castle laws so that people do not have to retreat when somebody invades their house. But, of course, I am not as pleased with Heller as you might think, because I think it opened the door to many more regulations. It pretty much gave carte blanche, in my opinion, to states to place regulations upon the right to bear arms. And, quite frankly, even though I'm a lawyer, I don't believe in positivist law. I believe that the right to self-defense against both criminals and oppressive governments is a right that comes from God.
Absolutely, but did they entrench existing, registration and other inhibitions on ownership, or did they add more to that?
Well, it's very unfortunate that when oral argument occurred, one of the lawyers who was representing the side of the Second Amendment was asked whether or not he had any problem with licensing regulations, and he basically said he did not. And we already are seeing some case laws or some cases follow this. The Ninth Circuit just came out with a case called U.S. versus Gilbert, where they followed the Supreme Court's lead in okaying regulation. And I'm sorry, I work with bureaucracies every day, and I know how they aggrandize power.
Yeah, and they're going to pick up on the small minutiae, but there is the larger picture here. And in fact, Randy Barnett, one of the sharpest legal minds in the libertarian community, called Justice Scalia's reasoning one of the clearest, in as much as the interpretation of the original meaning of the Constitution goes. So we might want to look also at the recognition of natural rights here, that is historical.
Well, I will look at what he has to write, but I don't always agree with lawyers who claim that they're libertarians. So we'll just have to see. And Alana, I want you to stay over because I want to talk a little bit more about this, and also, if we have time, let everybody know what your column for tomorrow is. So
sure.
Everyone stay over, and Alana and I will be here. Hello, it's Jerri Ward back with Alana Mercer. And Alana, you had a thought going there about the Heller case. What, you want to finish that thought before you had that going?
As I say, I haven't studied the case, but I haven't studied the decision. But I think that certainly we can look at the big picture and appreciate the fact that there has been a recognition of the right of self-defense as a natural right, which is in itself historic. You made the other point that the Brady Bunch is litigating based on Heller, and that certainly is an omen. I agree with you. But
one part that the Supreme Court left out is it's not only for self-defense against criminals, it's also self-defense against overreaching government. And we have a perfect example in the 20th century of that happening in Athens, Tennessee, in 1946, when veterans rose up against corrupt county government after that government beat up and threw out a poll watcher because they wanted to the government wanted to fix an election. The veterans in that town went home, got their guns, and they besieged the county courthouse, and they threw out a corrupt, oppressive government.
Lovely.
And that was the Second Amendment in action. And the court totally ignored that part of the right.
Ignored or forbade. I mean, this is a beginning. Surely there will be further litigation and building on this decision.
Oh, well, there is further litigation. We've got the Ninth Circuit approving regulations in a recent case, approving more regulations of the right to bear arms, saying that people don't have a right to machine guns and things of that nature.
Well, and that's been going on all the time, hasn't it?
That's right.
Well,
citing the Heller case.
Look, as I say, I'm not an expert on the Second Amendment, but I do see a great deal of positive to come out of this, at least in the substance of the decision. The minutiae of it, around it, you're right, the bureaucracy is going to pick up on, as is always the case. But I think that you do have something positive here.
Well, yes, we should look at both sides, that there is something positive, and but I also see something growing that's dangerous that we need to keep an eye on, and that we need to be prepared to fight at every turn because it ain't over yet. And neither is this show. We'll be back in 2 weeks for another I Object, Justice Examined.
See you in 2, Jerri.
Yes.
This is Right Talk Radio.